Hello friends, welcome to another GamersGrass basing guide. This time we will be wandering to a radiant Autumn Glade, a quiet clearing perched on the summits of a mystical forest. Here, your miniature characters will be immersed in a warm twilight scenario, the perfect setting for some epic fantasy narratives. So grab your paints and tools and let's explore how to create these thematic bases. Gather any base shapes and sizes you are planning to build. The first step is to add some rocks basing bits to your scene. Before gluing any of them, plan a layout for each of the bases and see how they work together. For a realistic result, align any bigger rocks in the same orientation, mimicking the direction of the geologic outcrop. Some of the bits you can easily divide in half, to use on small base sizes. We will later cover any traces. It's also useful to keep your models close by in order to help you decide the composition of each base. To glue the bits, use super glue. Apply a bit of pressure and hold them for a few seconds. Clustering the rocks together in some areas is also important, instead of placing them randomly. And remember to put some of the bits near the base's borders. They can even go slightly over them. This will improve the overall effect of the bases by prompting more realistic base edges. After the glue dries, you can cut off any extras of the bits using some fine cutting clippers and an X-Acto knife. Be careful with this step and aim for clean and slow cuts. You can even scrape the surface or use a fine sandpaper to improve the smoothness. Now cover the entire ground area with an earth effect paste. Make sure to envelop the corners of the bits so that they articulate seamlessly with the ground. It's also a good idea to sculpt a realistic earth relief by adding a bit more paste in some spots. Take your time to ensure you apply the paste to all areas. You can use a spatula or an old brush for this. Aim to keep the borders of the bases smooth throughout all of these assembling steps. In the end, the result will be much better. Once the paste dries, water down some PVA glue and grab some sand or rock dust. Cover all the earth area with the glue. Then sprinkle the sand or dust over the whole base and adjust it with the brush, adding a bit more glue to mix everything together. You can apply the sand in more or less quantities in order to differentiate some zones. For example, you can add more debris near the rocks, improving the overall realism. Leave the bases for some time so that everything dries completely. Use a large brush to clean the base's surface and remove any loose dust that didn't fix. With the assembly steps done, the bases are ready to be primed and painted. You can use a reddish primer. If you don't have one, a brown one will also work. Make sure to coat everything, including any gaps and undersides you might have between the bits. Wait for the primer to fully dry. Grab your painting gear. Use a wet palette to easily blend and mix the paints. We will start by adding some color nuances to the earth. With a mixture of dark brown, dark red and mild yellow, paint some parts of the ground area, combining the colors to add variety to the earth's tone. You can use thin or contrast paints for this step. Then, choose a mixture of different beige colors to paint a solid base coat for the rocks. Since we are painting a much lighter tone, don't thin down your paints too much, ensuring a strong coverage. Blend and combine the tones for a realistic rock effect, and don't forget to paint the smaller rocks of the scene. The next step is to apply a yellow-beige dry brush to everything. Bear in mind that the bases need to be fully dry before any dry brushes, or you risk spreading the paints unwantedly. Note how this will begin to highlight all the textures of the base. Employ the same technique using a lighter beige color, this time focusing only on the rocky bits and areas. Leave the bases to dry completely before moving on to the wash. For this theme, we opted for a sepia tone wash, in other words, a yellowish brown. The wash will not only smooth out the difference between the rocks and the earth, but will also add a bit more contrast to the overall scene. Make sure to reach every single bit of ground and rock. After the wash dries completely, grab a piece of cardboard again. Let's return to dry brushing. Repeat the last dry brush step, but employing more careful strokes over the rocks. See how the shapes gain increased depth. Follow the same principle for the ground, using a mild pink tone. Highlight some of the earth parts. As a last dry brush step, apply an off-white color, highlighting just the higher parts of the rocks. This will intensify the scene's contrast even more. Next, let's add some dry pigments magic. Smear the ground with dry earth pigment, just on some spots. This will add a dirt effect to the ground, and also create an interesting color variation. Over and around the rock bits, apply a grey ash pigment simulating rock dust and debris that rests against these outcrops. Spread the pigment, easily creating an aura effect. You can also add some spots of a strong yellow pigment to this autumn soil. It will prompt a slight golden hue, intrinsic to this theme. Finally, let's add a few extra details, the rock lichens. Prepare and mix the paints on your wet palette. With a fine brush, apply the paints with the stippling technique in some parts of the rocks. For an authentic effect, create clusters of each color. In some spots, you can stack the colors together. We went with orange, yellow and a bluish grey this time. Another trick is to keep applying dots of a lighter variant of each color gradually. The last painting step is to carefully paint the borders black. Clearly the most satisfying step. The bases are ready for some autumnal vegetation. Let's start with some mixed green grass tufts. To permanently fix the tufts, we recommend gluing them using PVA glue. You can use a flat surface to help you dip the tuft's underside. Use a pair of tweezers to be more precise when placing them. Pat them with the tweezers or fingers to ensure they are in place. These tufts will mimic the denser grass areas of the theme, so aim to group them in clusters. We recommend to form these clusters in the zones farthest from the rocks, where soil is more abundant. Another useful tip is to make the clusters go all the way up to the edge of the scene, as if these would continue. Coming up next, some autumn grass tufts. These tufts have drier tips that will mix well with the brown woodland hue of the former grass. Because of this, add them near and within the clusters you placed before. This being said, you can also place a few of them more independently, wherever you like to. Note how the color variation enriches the scene. At this point, we've kept the rocky areas mostly bare of tufts. Now, let's add the golden yellow grass tufts, this time near the rocks. Their bright yellow color will prompt the autumn feel of this theme to a whole new level, so we recommend to have at least one of these tufts in each of your bases. Like before, don't forget to keep placing the tufts near the edges. Create smaller or larger clusters of them near the rocky zones. With some of them, your bases should look something like this. Now let's blend everything together with some brown tuft magic. For this, use copper brown and brown tufts. Place them next to the yellow tufts, softening their effect in the whole scene. Try to create small clusters of each brown color, interlinking both groups at some points. You can even use your tweezers to gently divide the tuft if you need a smaller one. In the crevices of the outcrops and along the rocky area, this tuft combination will mimic the lower, drier grass of the autumn season. As a final touch, add a few dry bracken laser plants to spice up the realism of your scenario. Don't forget to check our tutorials on how to effortlessly fold them. It's quite easy. For all these bases, we will just need a few. Use superglue to fix them in place. Hold them for a few seconds, using our tweezers. Think on some spots for the plants. We recommend avoiding the base's center. It's effective if you glue them near the thicker grass, since it's where you'd have larger flora. You can also stack the leaf groups, creating a larger plant. Adding a tuft with superglue to the center of the plants can strengthen them and help them emerge from the grass. And the bases are done. Thank you for joining us today, and see you at our next video.